Welcome back to another episode of Worldie Unboxed. We are switching things up a little bit and using this episode to introduce our new teammate, co-founder, and chief of marketing, Fionna Wright. I won't spend too much time introducing Fionna because we are going to let her do that herself here shortly, but we are excited to have her experience, enthusiasm, and creativity on board. As always, stay connected with us by checking out worldiebrand.com and subscribe to our YouTube channel and Instagram page for episode highlights and exclusive content. All right, let's talk to Fionna.
Yeah, Fionna, so can you just describe your background for us, or for our listeners, I guess I should say?
Yeah.
Well, that's too, we probably want to know a little bit more as well.
Yeah. Well, we started in the nonprofit world in my family business. And I didn't realize I was doing marketing at the time, but I was managing the website and the social media, moved into the travel sector. From there, went very briefly into B2B. It was an internet company. It was awful. So I left. Then went into apparel, and here we are. And then among other things on the side, but that was the corporate journey in terms of marketing. It's always been from social media, website marketing in the family business, and then jumped into performance marketing and kind of handled everything in performance marketing since.
So it sounded like it was almost like accidental the way you got into marketing. Is that the way that you would describe it, or was it more intentional?
I always describe it as stumbling into marketing. So I didn't know that managing social media at the time counted as marketing. And then my parents retired, and none of us wanted to take over the business. It was a really stressful business. And so I was like, oh no, now what do I do? So I actually was having brunch with one of my girlfriends, and I was like, I don't know what to do with my life. And she was like, well, you like social media, and why don't you do marketing? And I was like, what's marketing? And so I started looking up jobs. I started looking up social media marketing, and just once you're looking in there, you end up in you realize it's a whole ecosystem. So this travel company, I don't know why they trusted me, but they hired me. I don't know how that happened. So on the first day, the owner was like, here's all the logins to all of these platforms that I had no idea. I just did social media. So she was giving me Google Analytics and Google Ads and Meta Ads. I hadn't really worked extensively in the social media ads outside of boosted posts. So I quite literally learned on the job. I was Googling, I listened to podcasts, I did YouTube videos on my commute to and from work. While I was at work, I was on the support chat, and I'm like, what do we do here? And so that's how I stumbled into it. It was great. Terrible at the same time.
And then it sounds like sorry, go ahead, Brendan.
I was just asking, how long ago was that again?
That was almost 10 years ago now. So they think they retired 15, 16-ish.
Okay.
Somewhere around there. Brandon was like, wait a minute.
I was just trying to see, I'm kind of okay, let's do the math. She started when, and she just make things up. Okay. All right. Now, that's cool, though. That's cool. You have a decade of experience now under your belt. So,
yeah.
And then within marketing, it sounds like you've done a few different things, but where would you say is kind of what's your expertise, or what's really in your wheelhouse?
Yeah, my specialty is in the digital paid ads world. So SEM, social media marketing. That's where I work the most from. But because of the way that I learned, I did everything.
Gotcha. And then it sounds like you've also kind of transitioned from B2B to B2C, and then also into D2C. So D2C, I feel like that's one of the harder places to be a marketer. Do you feel that way, or how do those feel different?
I don't agree. To me, B2B was harder. For me, D2C, maybe because of my personality, and I like being more involved. I like being customer facing. B2B to me was so with the nonprofit, we had a lot of privacy. It was group homes for kids. So there wasn't much I could share as it related to the specific business. It was more trying to do fundraising and things like that. And then in the internet company, you know what it was? To me, B2B, and such a personal opinion, it was just a little too boring. And for me, D2C, I feel like I get to be a little more creative and have more fun and connect with people. So that to me is a little less challenging.
Yeah, when we were in grad school, a lot of professors were kind of pushing us to shift and do something like a business that's B2B. And we were just kind of like, no, that's not really something that we're interested in. Like B2C is way more fun, interacting with customers, creating a product that people can hold and interact with, and we can do the same. Like it's just, for me, it's way more fun. I mean, maybe B2B is more lucrative or like the chances of success are higher, but I don't know. There's something about making a consumer brand that is just fun.
Yeah, I think B2B, like the reason why they were pushing it is easier. It's easier to kind of like, you only have like potentially 1 or 2 or 3 customers and then you're set. So for B2C, like you're always having to kind of like, worry about customer acquisition and all the other things that you're having to do from a D2C aspect of it. So yeah, no, I think B2B is, I agree with you. It's a bit more boring.
Then one of the other things that I noticed is that you have one master's, right? And you're working on a second. So can you tell us a little bit about that? Because we also have 2 masters, and that's kind of rare to go back and get 2 different advanced degrees.
Yeah. Oh, that's so cool. I thought you guys had it too. I was like, wait, they're law school and business. So the first one is in multimedia communications. And at that point in my life, I was thinking maybe I would go into journalism. I was interested in it. And I feel like my undergrad was for my parents. It was like, you have to go to school. And so I had to do something. So I just wanted to explore and see what else was out there. But I got pregnant. And so I think I got pregnant a few months before I graduated. So I didn't end up pursuing that at all. I jumped into motherhood and stayed in marketing. And so now this one is very specific to marketing. And because of the way that I learned marketing, I just wanted to have also a formal education. It's like street smart combined with book smart so that it can be really well-rounded and make sure that there was, I don't know what I missed and I don't know what I don't know. So that's why I'm going back again now, just to be really solid and rooted in this.
Yeah, that makes sense. I don't know if I said we have 2 masters or if I said we have 2 advanced degrees. I think technically it's 2 advanced degrees, not 2 masters. So I don't want to put out any like false information because I don't think the JD is technically a master's, right? Am I wrong? Is it?
What is it? Juris Doctorate? So like,
yeah.
But I do have another master's. I have like this throwaway master's that I have.
Oh, nice.
I got while military. So yeah.
This is really cool. Wait, you guys have doctorates?
It's a JD. Like, so I wouldn't necessarily go around advertising it as a doctorate, but like, I guess technically it is.
So technically you could, because I absolutely would. I would be like, Dr. Fionna, please. Thank you.
I don't know if I've never heard of an attorney like
doing that.
Was this like
No,
yeah.
I don't think so. Yeah. I think you just put JD after your name. I don't think you could say doctor before.
Like, it's not.
You say like Esquire, which is also.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
But yeah, that's another, I guess, way of identifying yourself.
So you guys are humble. Got it.
Yeah. Or
nobody really cares, I would say, outside the law. Like if you go around saying your name and then Esquire afterwards, I feel like a lot of people wouldn't even know what that means. And if they do, they just think you're pretentious.
Yeah.
But yeah, I also saw that you and your daughter have done a few kind of like entrepreneurial ventures. So you guys wrote a children's book together, right? And then you did a deck of kind of like affirmation cards for kids. So what inspired you to do that? And can you talk a little bit about the process for developing or creating both of those things?
Yeah. So it was inspired by my daughter. So, when you're a Black parent and you're raising Black kids, that there are certain conversations that you're going to have in their life in regard to race. So I was always prepared to have those conversations, but I expected them to be later. And it started when she was 3. She was exposed to racism and she started to not like her brown skin and question it and have all of these like her self-image was shattered and her confidence was shattered. And that's heartbreaking. And how do you explain the weight of the broken world to a 3-year-old? I still don't know how to explain that to a 3-year-old. So, but what I was thinking about during that time was the lack of representation. I'm like, oh, she needs to, at the very least, see more of herself represented in the world around her. So at that time, we started to just do dolls. Like we did a DIY project, painting our little brown dolls that look like us. and their like Doc McStuffins was around. So I immersed her in that, just anything I could find with representation, books, shows, everything. That was kind of the beginning of it. And then fast forward to when she was 6, we were in the quarantine. So we were at home. That's when I was in the B2B. That might also be why I hated it. It was awful. So I'm trying to like mom, parent her at home 24/7. And there was a lot of feelings. And I was thinking about, we may or may not remember the impact that this has on the little ones during quarantine. So I had this idea to write a book, which isn't far-fetched. My dad's had written books, so it was something within reach to me. So I was like, we'll write a book, and it will give me an opportunity to teach her the creation of a product, like from beginning to start, and get that kind of like that business education, and then do something creative together. So it's a bonding thing. And then it's also going to serve as a time capsule, because the book was about her big feelings during the quarantine. So she always has this reference to what she experienced. So that's kind of how that came about. I don't remember your other question.
The kind of the same question for the deck of inclusive affirmation cards.
So after we did the book, we got a lot of positive feedback, and we got a little bit of media attention, which meant more feedback. And what I gathered from the feedback was how helpful it was to have this book about emotions. And it was such a conversation starter for families. And mindfulness is something that's always important to me. That's a big part of my life, wellness and mindfulness. So that just translated into an idea of like doing a deck for kids, and inclusion and diversity is also very important to me. So with the deck, I could include more characters. So that's kind of where that came from.
It seems like you were pretty successful, because I saw in your LinkedIn profile that I think you were featured on OWN, NBC, and then you were in the Grammy gift bags in 2021. So like, how did things just take off like that?
So OWN found us on Instagram, which is why I'm such an advocate for social media marketing, because they found me through a hashtag, and they reached out, and they were doing a Christmas special, and they had seen our story. So they wanted to feature our story and book. And because we were in OWN, obviously we got a lot of exposure that way. And so that brought in a lot of success with the book. And then when we did the affirmation cards, with the book still, I had the book in the Grammys gift bags. That was a PR move. I did that. So you could secure a spot in the Grammys gift bags. But because we were in the Grammys gift bags, NBC, there's a reporter, Kim Caldwell from NBC at the time, and she was covering the Grammys gift bags, like what's in the bag. And so she followed us on Instagram again, and she was following our story. So she ended up reaching out and asked to cover us. We were also on Spectrum News, and similarly, they found us on Instagram. They wanted to cover us. So that's that. It all happened through social media, really.
And was it hard because for me, if I were trying to like create a book or a deck of cards, I would have no idea where to start. Was it hard to do that, or was it kind of easy?
No, I had written books before. We don't talk about Bruno, so don't put this part out of the podcast. So I was familiar with the process. So it wasn't that hard. And then I did utilize Fiverr for the illustrators.
So do you have any temptation to just become like a full-time writer, or no?
Maybe. I think I don't like that, the feeling of like being locked into something. I think it could be a part of the journey. I think anytime I get to explore creativity is fun for me.
Yep, that makes sense. And then what would you say you learned in terms of, from like an entrepreneurial standpoint, from those two experiences, creating the deck of cards and the book?
Yeah, I think the biggest lesson for me was having to be really creative and resourceful and scrappy, because I'm a co-parent on a single income. Like, I don't get any financial support. It's just me carrying everything. And so I have to protect our livelihood and try to fund my dreams, which that's, you guys know what that is like. So it taught me to just be really, the word that comes into my mind is resourceful, although I know that we kind of call it scrappy in this world. I think that was the biggest lesson for me.
Makes sense.
Yeah, that was definitely resourceful. We had like a similar experience with our daughter when she was going through her school out in Chicago, and they started kind of introducing some of the civil rights kind of era type of lessons in their curriculum, and we didn't know that it was coming. And she just comes home and she's like crying and upset, and facing a lot of the same things that you kind of discussed with your daughter and that experience. And so we didn't do we weren't as resourceful as you, but that was something that was it's not it's not something that you expect or anticipate like happening that soon. You know that it's coming, but never that soon. You're like, wow, it's crazy. And so like I think my reaction was much different. Like I was a little bit like upset at like, you know, they should have like run this by me, or like there should have been some kind of explanation so that I could like get out in front of it. And now I'm kind of hit with it and having to recover or to like retroactively try to do some things. And so like I thought that was really cool that you were able to kind of do that with your daughter. That's an amazing thing to do. So yeah, that's pretty much it on that. But like I thought that was really cool.
Thank you. And to your point, I also felt so her introduction was the school read a book, and I don't remember the exact title, but it was something like The Smudge. And in the entire book, it's the black smudge that is kind of the outcast. And so all of the different color smudges are scared of it. They think it's a monster and they're running from it. And then at the end, it's like, no, we're all. So I think maybe the intention was good, but what my 3-year-old took from that was brown and black is bad. And I'm brown and I don't like this. And I also was mad. So I did go to the, that school did not like me. I'm sure they're glad that I'm gone. But I was always over there advocating. I had them remove the book from the library. That turned in, they're now being sued, by the way, for racism. But yeah, to your point, it is upsetting because, and it's upsetting. And then it's just such a so weird to have to navigate and think about and all of that.
So switching gears a little bit from the topic of race back to entrepreneurship. I don't know if there's a good segue, but what made you want to jump into the startup world? Like what made you want to do that, especially with everything that you have going on in your personal life?
Well, I come from small business. My parents were small business owners. And so it's not an unfamiliar space. And I have deep respect for entrepreneurs. And I have my own endeavors that, you know, there's such a deep respect. And I like the idea of being part of something from the ground up and like having the flexibility and the freedom to create this space and like mold this into something like that is very cool to me. And then with you guys specifically, I liked the brand. It's a pain point for me personally. My daughter and her sneakers was such a big issue. I was like all for it. And so that was really the driving factor that it just speaks to my soul.
So if you can remember, what were you thinking when you first saw that LinkedIn post come across your feed where we were essentially saying we needed a co-founder and CMO?
I thought it was cool. I liked the brand. For full transparency, didn't realize it was the term. I didn't fully understand how it was going to play out until later, but I liked the brand and I thought that it was really interesting. It was aligned with what I already do. So yeah, first impression was good.
And then what made you want to apply, like pull the trigger and say, like, I actually want to look into this opportunity further?
Yeah, I liked it enough. And I liked that it was remote. That's a big thing for me.
And then like on the more negative side, like what were some of the like reservations you had, or was there anything that you were worried about when you first saw or talked to us?
I didn't realize the compensation part of it. I was trying to like tiptoe around a minute ago.
Yeah. No, I noticed that was like, how do I say this?
Because my plate is, you know, it's already full. And so when I was looking, it was either going to be something not as heavy and supplemental or replacing what I have now. So that was the reservation. But by the time I had a couple of conversations with you guys, I was like, how can I cannot not do this. I'm too invested now. Like we're here. So it is what it is.
Well, I'm glad we were able to win you over in those couple of conversations.
Yeah.
And then what would you say? I know we've been working together. I was thinking about this the other day. It feels like we've been working together for like 2 or 3 months. I think it's been like a month, right? Or maybe even less. So like what has been, or I guess, how would you describe working with the two of us? And then how would you describe each of us based on the last month or so?
It does feel like a few months, maybe because we were in contact leading up to the start date and we're kind of tiptoeing into it. I love it. I really enjoy it. My first impression of both of you, which is part of what sold me on it, was that you guys are so, on top of being intelligent and intellectual, you're also very um, structured is not the right word. What's the word I'm trying to say?
I would say organized, but I don't know if that's true.
It's yeah, sort organized too, but there's another word. It'll come to me later. Gosh, it's such an easy word. But in a sense, structured, like it feels serious. I know that you take this seriously. The fact that you've done this, you've been working on this for a couple of years. You're very intentional, you're focused, you're strategic. So I was sold on you guys as founders. And so working with you is easy because I know that anything that arises, we're going to jump in, we're going to figure it out. It's going to get handled. Like no one is sketchy and weird. And what was the second? Oh, and then each of you guys have such an interesting dynamic to me because I feel like Brandon is kind of more happy-go-lucky, like no, what's the saying? Like no sweat off my back or something. Like that's kind of where you live. Whereas Aaron, I feel like you are a little bit more reserved and I feel like you pay attention to micro moments. Like I feel like Brandon's like big picture, like, it's fine. We're just gonna. Whereas Aaron, I kind of feel like you notice every single little thing. You're very detail oriented, and I feel like you absorb all of that. But it works. It's such a like I feel like because of that, you guys carry each other really well. So it's been a joy working with both of you. You know what I'm gonna hate in the playback?
It's that.
Animated and I talk with my hands, and when I'm watching this back, I'm gonna be really upset by that.
No, I think that's good. Like, I think it's good to be animated to kind of have those.
You don't have to watch yourself like that. That's why.
I mean, we all watch ourselves back, and I feel like one of the things that I've realized in terms of like content creation is like we all hate like everything about ourselves essentially. And
I wouldn't go that far, but yeah.
maybe not all. Yeah, maybe just like some of us.
Fan.
Maybe I should just talk for myself, but a lot of people like don't like the sound of their voice, but if you listen to it over and over again, you eventually just accept it. And same kind of thing with mannerisms. Like I look at my mannerisms and I'm like, I can't believe I actually do that when I talk. I look so stupid. And then eventually you get used to it. And then like other people, when they talk about it, it's like, no, that looks normal. But I guess in their mind, they think it looks weird. So I guess I'm saying just be on the podcast more and you'll get used to your mannerisms.
But yeah, I think you did hit the nail on the head. We've been told that in terms of like our dynamic, we've been told that before, and it just kind of works for us. Like it ends up being like a really good like I guess relationship from like a founder perspective because we're able to kind of cover so much ground because of our different like I guess perspectives, personalities, character traits, and things like that. So I think that was good. I like that too. That was very very positive.
I liked it. I liked it too. Yeah, it was very positive. I like that. And then where do you see yourself personality-wise kind of fitting in with the two of us? And how do you see yourself, I guess, creating like a different dynamic?
Yeah, I think a little bit, by nature, I'm a little bit of mama bear. So there's like this nurturing aspect. Not to say that you guys need nurturing, but it's like, it's like the woman's touch. It's going to add a little bit of emotion in here. And in terms of like personality-wise, that's how I see it fitting in. How do you guys see it fitting in? Is that inaccurate?
No, I think that's accurate. I think we realized that we were missing something. We were like missing, as much as I was just like talking up like our dynamic, there was still some like missed space there, some missed opportunity there because we were, coming from it from like a male perspective or like from like a perspective that doesn't necessarily take into account like the entire target audience that we're trying to address. And so we're like, you know what, we've got to get someone in who can like reach that, who can like think on that level. And I'm like also like trying to bounce around it because I don't want to say like, oh, we're looking straight, for a woman, but like we wanted like a different, and I'm gonna have to do some editing on this. We wanted like a different like perspective. We wanted someone to come in and bring like a unique like view that we just could not or do not have. And so like that was like one of the things that really like appealed to us. Like we're like, oh wow, that that type of like experience, that type of like perspective is like super important for us, and we that's part of it. So I'll say that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think for me too, like just in general, when you go from 2 to 3, I think that is kind of a big jump in terms of, I mean, just in terms of like disagreements, right? It's like a tiebreaker, which helps. And then just a third person, it feels more like a team. versus a partnership, which I think we were ready to go from just the two of us to more of a team. And I think 3 is good for now. Like I'm not really looking to expand much further than that in the near future. But it feels like with 3, we can do everything that we need to do. And it doesn't feel like we're drowning in work. Whereas with 2, it felt like, man, with day jobs, it's starting to feel like a lot. Like I'm not sleeping, I'm not working out. Whereas now it's like I'm doing that a little bit. Still not as much as I would like, but a little bit more than I was before.
Yeah.
So, I mean, when you look at the next, let's say, few months or year, like what milestones are you most excited for us to hit? Or maybe just like on a day-to-day basis, like what are you most excited to be doing?
Yeah. Well, I'm most excited to launch and get this thing to market. That's huge. And then in terms of my specific role here, I would love to grow the Instagram or the social media presence more, like pretty significantly. That's very exciting to me because that to me translates to community. And then also, though, in real life, building community outside of the internet. That's exciting. And just watching this kind of all come together and become a functional, consistent, cohesive system and machine that we get to run, and like that unity of all of the parts coming together, that's really exciting to me.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that too. And I think having you on board, I've already seen like some of the benefits of it, because for a long time we were kind of like, we got to start posting on Instagram. Like we're going to do it. Just give us a month. Yeah. Yeah. And then we never did it, but seeing you and like everything you've been able to do with social media and then other stuff that doesn't even kind of, I guess, see the light of day in terms of like a random person being able to see it, like it's definitely been super helpful. So I'm super excited for this dynamic to kind of like grow and for us to build that machine that you were talking about, because I think we can, and I think it'll help a lot of people. So I'm super excited to launch and then grow from there as well. And Brandon, unless you had any more kind of like background questions for Fionna, we can pass it off to her because I know she has some questions for us.
That was a good background, so I think we're good to go.
Okay. So this is the seat that I like to be in, not that seat. So you both met in business school, or explain that to me, because you both have the JD in business. How does that work? But wherever you met, my question was, what was your first impression of each other?
Well, I guess I can answer the part of where we met. So we did meet at the University of Chicago, and we were getting our JD MBA. The first year, at least I was fully remote. So I was actually out in San Diego for that first year and just like taking the classes via Zoom. And then, so maybe I ran across Aaron on one of the Zoom classes, because I think we have sections, and not to kind of get into like the granular details of like the U Chicago Law School structure, but like you have like different sections, and usually you take your core classes with your section. But because I was remote, I was able to hop around into different sections. And so we weren't in the same section or Bigelow group or whatever you want to call it. So I ended up taking a class with him, and that's like the first interaction, or at least the first time I saw him. And then the next year, I ran across him when we were both at booth, just kind of in the hallway, maybe talked for like 15, 20 minutes. Both ended up being on like intramural teams because we were big into sports. And then that's kind of where the relationship started to go. And maybe I'll let Aaron kind of take it from there.
Yeah, I was actually remote my first year too, which I think is why we were in a few classes together. And I remember there's cold calling in law school, so you just get randomly called on. And I remember when Brandon got called on one time, I saw that he had golf clubs in his background. And I was kind of like, yeah, I mean, I like golfing too. Like maybe me and this guy would get along if we ever meet up in person. But other than that, I didn't really have any thoughts. And then like Brandon was saying, we met in the business school, and he said we talked for like 15 to 20 minutes. I thought he was going to say like 15 to 20 seconds, because like I don't really remember that conversation. I think there were like other people around too. So maybe it was like a group of us talking for that long. But just in general, like this is kind of like a hot take, but I don't really think first impressions, at least to me, they don't matter that much, because I always forget them. Like I guess I have a first impression of someone, but then by the time I get to know them, I completely forgot what my first impression of that person was. So for Brendan, like I literally can't even really remember what I initially thought about him. But like he was kind of alluding to at the end, we really met on a flag football team. And that's when we started kind of like interacting more. And I had this initial kind of like business idea that I wanted to pursue in grad school. And there are some programs that you could participate in to kind of like push your venture forward and take it from an idea to more of like a solidified business plan and then hopefully launch by the time you graduate. And I pitched a good amount of people, and he was the only one who was very interested in doing it and doing stuff outside of class with it and kind of like actually turning it into a business. So that was kind of like my first real impression of him. Like, oh, this is another guy who's like interested in entrepreneurship and who's actually serious about pursuing it, not just someone who's like, I'm in business school. It's cool to tell people that I'm starting a business, but I don't want to do the hard work to actually do it. So I would say that was my first impression.
Yeah, I can agree with that. Like the very first impression, a bit hazy on, I don't remember, but like over time, like I remember that dynamic. I remember the dynamic of like, interacting through like sports. I remember the dynamic of interacting through the early stages of our venture. And like when we were kind of going through and doing like the customer discovery process and, putting more work on our plate and like really being kind of sincere about it. And we even had like a couple of other like JD and BA students who were kind of helping us, and they ended up kind of falling off as time went on, and especially as like rubber started meeting the road. So yeah, I think that's right. I would 100% agree.
And that's when the bromance began. I love that story.
Oh yeah, that's the origination story.
How did you go? Oh, well, never mind. You kind of answered that. I was going to ask, how did you go from classmates to co-founders? But was there a specific moment when you thought like, okay, yeah, we should do this together?
For me, I think it was during the customer discovery process. So we were in this class that was called Building the New Venture. And that's a course that's just like given out at Booth, and like you can kind of test an idea or even like theoretically go through like a startup's life through this course. And then there was also this like almost extracurricular type course, a course that you would take up through the Polsky Center, which is like the entrepreneurial center of U Chicago Booth. And it's where you actually are getting tested idea with customers. And so like they set up like a program for you to use in terms of the materials. And then they would encourage you to go out and interact with your target audience. And at the time, we were building a shoe for former competitive athletes. So we would go out and we would talk to a lot of our peers, because a lot of our peers were former competitive athletes. And it was somewhere during that stage that I was like, you know what? And maybe it was because we were hearing the ideas and hearing the other ventures that were going on around us and thinking to ourselves, we've got something a bit more solid than like whatever he's saying or whatever she's talking about. And like our belief in our own project was growing as we were listening to others explain their projects and things that they were working on. We're like, I actually believe in my idea a bit more than that. And maybe that's a lot of bias is a part of that, but like that's kind of where it was starting to solidify, at least for me. I don't want to necessarily speak for Aaron, but like it started to solidify there. And it just kind of continued to grow as like we were able to like do certain things. And they were like little bitty tiny like milestones when we look back on them, but like just interacting with people in various networks, being able to build a very rudimentary like project through like a CAD file, those kind of little tiny milestones, talking to people within our networks, getting good feedback, those kind of things like help to kind of grow the idea of taking this on full time.
Yeah, for me, I don't know if there's a specific moment. If I had to pick, there's kind of like two that stand out. So the first one would be just talking to parents and essentially hearing the same pain points over and over again in terms of, sizing was one of the ones we heard, a major one, which we haven't really been able to figure out with this first design, but durability, fit, comfort, easy on, off, things like that, traction as well. Those were some of the things that we heard like over and over and over again. And essentially hearing that a lot of parents were not satisfied with the options that were currently in the market, it gave me confidence that like, hey, we should actually build something that's better. Because until that point, a lot of people are just like, you guys realize there's a company called Nike, right? Like they make kids shoes. What are you guys doing? And we would always try to like explain it. And they're like, no, this makes no sense. Like Nike is just going to crush you guys. But then kind of like hearing that, doing that grassroots kind of like, I guess, surveying and hearing from a lot of people who actually bought kid shoes that they weren't satisfied with what Nike or other brands were doing, that gave me confidence like, hey, there is room for another brand in the space. And then one of the other things that gave me a lot of confidence was when we talked to people who had spent like 15, 20, 25 years in the footwear space. And they were like, the industry needs a brand like yours. And hearing that from people who have worked in the industry, and they were kind of like pointing out some of the issues that they see currently in terms of how brands think about or make kids shoes. That also gave me a lot of confidence that like, hey, this is not just some random idea that we came up with. It's actually something that is needed. And people are seeing that from a customer perspective. They're seeing it from the perspective of someone who's like, run the kids department or, kids division of a big footwear brand, or they've seen what the attention that this brand gives to adult shoes versus kids shoes. So I would say that those two moments were kind of like when I really realized like, hey, we actually have something with this idea.
Thank goodness you guys came together. I really do believe that you have something special here, obviously. Joined. Tell me about the moment the idea for worldie first clicked. Well, you kind of touched on that, but again, if there was like a specific moment, the details around it, where were you? What sparked it? Sounds like it was through conversations with athletes and then with...
It depends what you mean by that, because we've gone through a few different pivots. So the initial idea I came up with like 7 years ago at this point, because I was shopping for soccer cleats for the first time, like after having played competitively. And it was just a super, super painful experience because I was good enough to, like, I can tell the difference between a low quality cleat and a high quality cleat. But at that point in my life, I didn't want to pay like $250 or $300 because I knew that you're paying for something that's not really that much better. Like it's better, but it's not that much better. And I was kind of trying to tell the person in the store, like, hey, this is what I'm looking for. Like, I don't want to pay $250. I want something that's got these materials, that has this feel when I'm, dribbling the ball, things like that. And he just looked at me like I was crazy. Like he had no idea anything that I was saying. He didn't know what I was talking about. And I just couldn't find anything that really worked for me as someone who wanted like high performance, comfort, something that wasn't, because a lot of times in the cleat space, there's all these different kind of like technologies or bells and whistles that are changing a lot from year to year. So you can find something like in 2024 that you love, and then you go to buy it in 2025 and they completely changed it. And essentially I was kind of like, well, a lot of people who have played sports when they were younger at a competitive level, now they're a bit older. They want consistency, they want comfort, they want something that aligns with their values, things like that. So it's like, why isn't there a brand out there like the Nikes, Adidas's, Pumas of the world? They really market to basically people who are currently competitive athletes, and then also kids in terms of like wanting to wear the same thing that the high school kids are wearing or that the pros are wearing. But they don't really create a product for people who have graduated from that and now are playing a little bit more recreationally, but they still want something that's high quality. So that was the initial idea. And that's kind of like what I pitched Brandon initially, some kind of like soccer cleat or sports shoe for people who had played competitively when they were younger, wanted to continue to play sports more recreationally as they got into their, late 20s, 30s, whatever it is. And that was the initial idea that we had. And then we pivoted from that into a kids soccer cleat, and then pivoted from that into a kids versatile multi-purpose shoe, which is what we're at, the idea that we're on now. I can't remember the exact moment that we made the two pivots, but I think it was just kind of like hearing from a bunch of different parents, like what they wanted out of a shoe, and then kind of like how they use shoes today. So one of the things that we noticed is that when kids are first getting into sports, so around 5, 6, 7, their parents are sending them to just about every different sport and athletic activity in the same shoe. And they kind of like want one shoe to work for everything or just about everything. And then we realized that there's not really a shoe that's built for that in the market. And if parents are already kind of using shoes in that way, why don't we design a shoe that's built for that purpose? And that's kind of how we landed on the current version of the idea.
I love that.
Yeah. I don't know if I have too much to add to that. I think like my belief in worldie as it like looks today kind of started with like what Aaron was describing in his previous answer. It started with like our conversations with parents, our conversations with customers. I think every single time we stepped away from one of those conversations, we do like a recap and talk about like, okay, this is some of the major takeaways, because we were taking notes as the parent was talking. And every single time we stepped away from one of those conversations, we're like, oh man, we learned so much. There were so many things that we were able to get out of that just conversation. So we wanted to make sure that we always included customers in the circle. And so I think that's when it really started to become a reality that like, okay, worldie is going to be something, because we were able to kind of connect on a very almost like personal level with parents and a lot of the pain points that they were discussing, and we were able to kind of morph the idea around that, as opposed to kind of moving forward bullishly with the original idea that we were kind of having. So I think that's where it really began for me to materialize into something that I felt like, okay, this is worldie. This is what it's going to be.
Hearing your guys' story kind of solidifies for me how I already feel about worldie, which is that it is more than just a sneaker. Like, it feels like a movement in some ways, and that feels right. Yeah. What has been the scariest part of this journey so far, if anything? Maybe you're
the scariest part is always, for me anyway, and I don't know if it's like scary or if it's just like knowing that like, okay, this is going to be something that's going to involve me winning a person over. Anytime we start introducing the idea to someone who's not necessarily in our target audience, but someone that we know has experience that we kind of want to glean and use, so we have to inevitably explain the idea to and explain the story. And especially if you don't have a whole bunch of time to do it, because if we sit in this type of setting, it's relatively easy to get that buy-in, because we can kind of talk about all the nuances and like all the various stages, like the type of like vision that we have in there. And it's much easier in this setting, but like in the settings that we've kind of been in the past and continue to be in, where we're trying to explain the idea, where we're trying to not necessarily get buy-in, but at the very least kind of get their advice on certain aspects of the business. You have to explain it relatively fast. You've got to have your elevator pitch, and it's not, and you're not really trying to pitch the idea as much as you're just trying to get them up to speed so they can give you like solid advice. And you always have to like deal with like, and it's good to kind of continue to get poked and prodded and like, okay, these are some areas that you should really think about. But then when they start thinking, or if they start like ideating and opining on things that they don't necessarily have their experience in, so they like, oh, this won't work, but they've never like launched a product, or this won't, you can't do it this way, but they've never launched a product, or you can't do this. And, like you have to kind of get beyond that, and you have to kind of separate the advice that you really want them to give you, and like the advice, that's going to be beneficial to worldie, from like, advice that they don't really have the authority to kind of give.
I would say somewhat similarly, like just sharing the idea with people, especially at the beginning when you don't have anything tangible to show. You don't really know what they're going to say. And it gets a bit like sharing the idea and hearing the same things over and over again, or hearing people tell you like, you shouldn't do this, or you're going to fail, or you're going to get crushed by fill in the blank company. Like it gets pretty annoying. It gets tired after a while. So you get a little bit, you're not scared to share the idea, but you're like, man, if I share this idea, like there's a really good chance that they're just going to lecture me and like say all these things that I've heard before and that I know. Like we know that it's going to be hard. We know that there's really big companies that are in this space as well. And like the 100th person to tell us that, like it doesn't really give you anything additional. And it's just kind of annoying to have to like sit there and listen to that lecture, because you don't want to like burn the bridge and just be like, hey bro, like I've heard this before. You can, you can stop right there. I know what you're going to say. You kind of just sit there and listen. And if it's like a minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, we've had some calls that are like an hour where the person is just telling us like, hey, you need to like reconsider everything that you're doing. You need to turn into a nonprofit, potentially just shut down and do something else. And after a while, you're kind of like, man, I don't know if I want to like share too much about the idea, because like I'm open to feedback and I like hearing different people's perspectives, but I don't want to just sit there while someone tells me everything that we're doing wrong, or, everything that they think we should be doing instead. So that is something that can get a little bit annoying over time. And I think the other thing that will be scary is just kind of like launching. So that's kind of like what this has all been leading up to. And we want it to be a really successful launch, and hopefully it is. But once you kind of like hit publish on that Kickstarter campaign, or republish the website and tell people that we're accepting orders, after a day or two, you kind of see what the results are and how successful it is. So I think that will be like a very anxiety inducing 24 or 48 hours, I think, for me.
On the flip side of that, what's been the best moment in this journey?
I think for me, the best moment is holding the product, because it's basically a manifestation of all your hard work. But then it starts to wear off after time. Like it gets to be kind of like the same thing. You're like, okay, like I've made the product. This is just another iteration of it. So it's not the same. I think like what we're doing it for our customers. So once we have customers, I feel like that's really going to be like when people are like, hey, these shoes are way better than the shoes that my kid used before. Or like my kid is able to use these for all these different sports. Like I think those anecdotes will probably be the best part moving forward. Right now, I would say it still is just being able to like see the product, touch it, inspect it, things like that. And then seeing it on kids' feet also is super cool. But like me and Brandon were talking about it on a podcast like a week or two ago. Those people haven't paid to put it on their kids' feet. So it's not quite as impactful as it would be otherwise, but it is really cool to see like a finalized product that you've made and then see it out in the wild and people interacting with it. So I'd say that's been the best part so far.
Yeah, I echo that. Like the best part is like seeing the product on kids' feet and like seeing them play with it. I think one of the earliest moments for us, like an early highlight, was when we first received our it was the very first sample that we received, and we were in the middle of like bar prep, so we're setting for the bar, and like Aaron gives me a holler that like, okay, our samples have arrived. Like we got samples, and you immediately like drop all like bar prep stuff, and we go out to one of the fields on U Chicago's campus. I bring my daughters out there, and it's only one shoe, like one like side of a pair, so it's like the right shoe. So we only got the right shoe, and it doesn't matter. Like we put it on. It's not even a wearable sample. It's like an aesthetic prototype. So like something that you're just supposed to visually inspect. But we were like, screw it, like put it on. Went out in the field, set up some cones, got the camera rolling, and just like had her running around, doing drills, doing stuff. And it was just like, that was like a really cool moment, because that was the first time we actually saw the product like in real life. Like that was the first time we actually held it, the first time that we were actually able to see someone use it for what we intended it to be used for. And so that was like a super cool moment. And then the other one just recently happened. It's like this latest iteration of the shoe, and setting up a similar situation, but this time there was a bunch more, there are a lot more kids involved, and seeing them all run around in it, taking pictures of it and seeing the worldie like on several kids' feet, like, wow, like they're all running around, super excited to have it, like jumping, playing, doing the things that you like, wanted the shoe to do. And I think that was like super amazing. But like Aaron said, like it kind of comes back to earth when you realize like, these were just products that we were kind of giving away. We really need to get buy-in when, we start actually selling the product. So like we understand that it was like exciting to see this, but we do realize that there's some other milestones that we have to overcome, some other thresholds that we need to overcome in order to really get that euphoric feeling of, hey, we actually are actually like a real, no kidding company creating something that people are enjoying.
There. I'm going to switch gears a little bit and ask each of you, how are you taking care of your emotional and mental health on this journey?
Oh man, I know this is something that we said in the future that we're going to be doing a wellness podcast, and maybe this is kind of a precursor to that, or a little foreshadowing of what's to come. I in the past have not done anything like when it comes to like mental health, like. And that's not something that, and maybe it was like the military background, because it's always like frowned upon, like, oh no, you don't want to have any kind of like mental health or anything like that. That's kind of something that doesn't necessarily get talked about, at least when I was in, as much. Maybe it's a kinder, gentler military. But anyway, like it was something that I never really thought about. And even growing up, like you never think about like mental health, like where I was at, like growing up in the South, like it's not something that like was, you know, I guess people really kind of discussed a whole bunch, but especially going into like a program like the JD MBA program, that was taxing. Not to say that some of the military programs that I went to weren't taxing, but it's different. It was more of like a physical component, whereas this is like, okay, this is like challenging you mentally, and like it was absorbing a lot of your time. It's not the most exciting thing to be doing, but you're having to do it at a very high level. And so that became a bit of a challenge. The area that you're in, Chicago, is pretty like, especially come January, dark and cold, and you get all this like compounded. You've got your family there. You're trying to do some other stuff. So like there are some challenges that you overcome, and so I think the best way for me to have overcome a lot of the challenges there was like to kind of lean on family to really try to spend as much time, separate some time for them. Maybe this is good, maybe it's bad, but like military taught me to compartmentalize, like to segment all things, like not to take your work necessarily home. And so I was able to kind of create like these bastions of space that I can kind of hang out with the girls, and not like focus on work, and not focus on even worldie. Like even though worldie has been a therapeutic in a sense anyway, like I felt like it was a different aspect of like my mind that I was challenging. There was even chances to like break away from that a little bit, to just kind of focus on being in the moment and being present. And so I think that's, for me, like one of the ways in which I've been able to keep my mental wellness in check.
I would say on my end, like I'm still trying to figure it out. I don't have a good answer because I don't think I'm doing a good job of it right now. But with this business and just in life, I'm trying to figure it out, try to figure out some different strategies and things that work. And I've found some things that work for me, and I don't always do them. So I have to be better about that. And then there's other things that I'm like, I don't know how to deal with that, but I'm going to keep trying. So that's what I would say on my end.
Well, then we absolutely have to have the wellness check-in.
Yeah, those will be interesting. Like I never really like sit around and talk about mental wellness. So that'll be another unique challenge for me, I think.
Good. I love that for both of you. Similarly, I have a military dad. He was Army, so I feel like you described him in a lot of ways where we weren't allowed to care about our emotional and mental health. How do you handle naysayers and the people who don't quite get the vision, or all the ones who are saying that this won't work? You kind of touched on that already, but if there's anything else you wanted to add.
I think the one thing that I would add is when we were first starting out, we would get like way too up or down based on what one person would say to us. So we'd be like, oh, this person's like super experienced in the footwear space. They just said that our idea is great. So this is a great idea. And then the next day we talk to someone and we're like, well, this is a really esteemed professor. They say that our idea is terrible. So we need to go back to the drawing board. I think over time, we've started to realize that any one person shouldn't completely change the way you think about your business. And there's going to be people who like the idea. There's going to be people who don't like the idea. And it's more about just kind of like listening to what they're saying, seeing where there's merit, where you can kind of add that to what you're doing. But if they just like fundamentally disagree with what you're doing, then it's kind of like, well, it's unfortunate that you don't like the idea, but that's not going to make us change our path. And maybe we'll ask you for feedback again later down the road if we do change things up. But other than that, it's kind of like, you don't like the idea, that's fine. We'll just move on and continue to make progress and interact with people who are a bit more constructive in some of their feedback.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think one of the things that we did was we would categorize like what kind of advice we're looking for from this individual. So we knew what we were looking to get, the information that we were looking to get from them, and this is kind of something that I alluded to earlier. And so like the other stuff, like when they like kind of spilling over into areas that they, more or less didn't have the expertise in, then we would kind of take it with a grain of salt. I mean, we'd still listen. It's not like, oh, we're cutting them off, or we're rolling our eyes, or we're like shutting down. But we would try to just like glean what we could off of there, but really focus on the advice that we're looking to get from them, and kind of using that advice to help move the company forward. And like Aaron was saying, like we started treating individuals not like this is in a bad way, but like as data points. Like, okay, this is just one data point. This is not like a data set. This is a data point. If we start noticing a trend, then that's when we can start like making any kind of move. Like we're not going to move off of a data point. Like that's irresponsible to do that. And so like we would take that advice and we would record it, and we would look for trends. And so that's been like our main thing, is to kind of not necessarily get so attached to like one piece of information and act off of like one piece of information. We want to see a much bigger picture. And so we want to see some trends. We want to see like this analyzed across like a broader spectrum before, making any kind of movement or making any kind of change. And so those are like some of the ways in which we approached it. And then there's one final way that I think that we've kind of like been able to deal with naysayers, is that we really focused on getting the business type advice, the core business advice from people who've been there, like people who've already done it before. And like they've already like, that's where we kind of like hold on to their opinion a bit stronger. So that data point, like it's a bit more vibrant when you look at it on the spectrum, because that's someone who's actually gone down the path that we want to go down. And that advice is actually a bit more actually positive, because they can see exactly what we're doing. They're able to provide us like with advice that like really is timely. And so that's been like our one of our bigger, I guess, moves away from like, okay, when we're looking for people to kind of get advice from, is to focus on people who've been down this road before, and kind of leaning on them and leaning on their expertise.
Solid. And if you could go back to day one of worldie and give yourselves advice, what would it be? What do you think?
I would say a few things. So one of the things that I've realized in this process is that you kind of have to be shameless, and you kind of have to be comfortable being viewed as cringe or doing things that are like not necessarily cool. So being more comfortable with that sooner. And I would say sharing our story sooner, because that's something that has really resonated with people. And I think things started going a lot more smoothly once we did start sharing our story, and people were seeing like the progress that we were making. And one of the big challenges that we initially had was finding a designer. And it took us like, I can't remember how long, maybe like 6 months to find a designer. Whereas like if I had to find a designer today from scratch, like it would take me like a day or 2 days to have like 5, 10, 15 people lined up. So I think part of that is just because now we have more credibility in the space because we've been sharing our story. But that was something that I thought like people are not going to care about your story because you haven't built anything that's worthwhile, but people do care about kind of like the journey versus just the destination. So that would be one thing. Another thing is just getting, I would say, like product feedback sooner. So this is something that we've talked about a lot, just like being perfectionists and not putting anything into the market for, I think, like 3.5 years or whatever it's been. And it's been really cool to like see the product, even if it's not like the 100% version of the product, like the 90%, 95% version that we've been testing, and just getting that feedback, getting photos of kids wearing the shoes, starting to have people interact with the brand. I think that's super valuable. And like if I could do it over again, I would say like we should do that a little bit sooner. And then the last thing is, and this might just be for me, but like I used to get like super fixated on certain people and be like, if we bring this person on board, then our company is just going to take off. Like 100% it'll take off if we get this person on board. And then kind of like the flip side of that is, if you think that way and then you don't get that person on board, then you're like, oh man, like now I don't know how this thing is going to take off without them. And you can always kind of like find people to fill certain roles. And that's not to say you should just bring on any random person, but there's a lot of talented people out there, and there's a lot of different routes that you can take to success. And if someone is like ghosting you, or they're just not really super excited, I would tell my, like, the earlier version of myself, just move on. Like, don't waste time on someone who's not interested in you. So sounds kind of like dating advice, but it's really, really startup advice.
I was going to say that.
Yeah, I think that a lot of the things that you mentioned, Aaron, are things that I would probably tell my former self. I know we had a lot of discussion in the past about failing fast, like being, iterating, failing and iterating. And we had a strong belief that if we failed, like, our credibility would take a humongous hit. And like, that's not something that we could kind of like necessarily come back from. But the more I've thought about it, the more I'm like, you know what, as I see like the first couple of iterations of our shoe, and then it not being perfect. And like, we've kind of introduced, like, we had an issue with like the opening on this last one, like not being able to don as easily, like, as we wanted it for kids to be able to put it on. And it wasn't a killer. Like the parents, like, they, they're very like forgiving. They're like, yo, yeah, this is going to be awesome. Like, change, if you're able to do this, it's going to make, they're really positive. Like it was much more positive feedback, even when the product wasn't up to snuff. And wow, you know what? Maybe we were wrong. Maybe we were wrong when we said that we wanted it to be a perfect product before we like launched it, because people are a bit more forgiving of a startup. And that's something that we heard at the very beginning. Like, one of the guys, I don't even remember his name, but he told us that because he was like, yeah, this is what happened with Allbirds. Like, Allbirds, like, their first product was crap. Like, it was garbage, but people believed the idea and they believed where it was going to go. And we heard that and we were like, yeah, but they had this experience, or they had this person on their team, or they had this type of backing. So they had this type of credibility. And we kind of said that we weren't them, so we are just two guys and like, grad students. And like, we still have a lot of like credibility to kind of gain. So we can't fail like that and expect to like succeed later on. But I think looking back at that was actually wrong. And the advice he gave was right, that we could have iterated sooner. We could have moved faster. We could have launched earlier. And I don't want to say it was just him with that advice. We had that advice later on from some guys that we even brought into like we have episodes on, and they've had LinkedIn interactions with us and saying like, you guys just need to go out there and kind of launch. And we've been so hesitant to go out and publicly face with a product that we weren't 100% happy with. And I think we've definitely allowed perfect to be the enemy of good in that standpoint. That long dissertation made me kind of forget my second point. Oh yeah, it was talking to customers, like talk to customers even more. And this kind of goes back to the conversation, or the answer to that other question that I was mentioning, that every single time that Aaron and I came out of a conversation with a customer, we learned so much. There was so much that like came from it. And we're like, wow, every single time we talk to a customer, we have like this type of experience. We need to just talk to more customers. And that's what I would just reiterate with my former self, is like, make sure you're talking to as many customers as possible, because they're going to be the ones who guide you. They're going to be the ones who help you identify the pain points that really matter. They're going to be the ones who get you to product market fit. Like, no other thing is going to do it as well as a customer will be able to do it. It's like, or your target audience or your back or whatever who's going to be able to do it. So that is like one of the points that I would emphasize with my former self, is just talk to more customers, talk to as many customers as possible, get that information, be able to organize that information. And like I mentioned in an earlier answer, like recognize trends and act upon them. So those are the two things that I would probably do or would want to do.
Kind of a great segue into my next question, which is, if you could talk directly to a parent or a coach who's just hearing about worldie, what would you say to them?
Let's say buy our shoes.
I don't know.
Maybe to Brandon's point, while he thinks, I might just ask them, as a brand, as a new brand that's focusing on youth sports, youth athletes, like the youth sports ecosystem. So parents, coaches, all that kind of stuff. Like, what would you like to see a brand do differently? And beyond just providing products that are superior, like, what could we do to make your life easier, to build community, things like that, because that is something that we've been thinking about a lot. Like, how do we tap into those communities and really make them champions of our brand? And like Brandon was just saying, like, kind of the best way to get answers to a lot of these questions is just asking your customer base. So that's probably what I would do. I would ask them rather than trying to pitch them on our business.
Yeah, that was like the biggest thing, because I've actually had to have these interactions before. And typically they don't go with me like going in and telling them about worldie, or telling them about what we're doing, or telling them about anything really. A lot of times it's them asking more about some things that I'm doing, or but it comes up organically. They're talking about something, they're bringing up something, and then we kind of get on the topic. And so it's not necessarily me like pushing or driving the conversation a certain direction. It's them, kind of describing their situation or experience, or maybe a pain point comes up and we're like, yeah, it's a good segue. That's a good way to like introduce worldie. I mean, it's kind of funny that you mentioned it. We've been all over the board, especially with like a sports background, and you've seen our culture document. And it's still very much a work in progress, because it's a smorgasbord of all these different cultures that little aspects of it that we want to emulate, because we're like, oh, that's cool. That's unique. Oh, that's something that's like can be instilled in our organization. We can see the benefit there. And some of it will stick and some of it won't, based upon like where we kind of go. But when I think about the company culture, I think the overarching thing is just like being able to, kind of like persevere, because that's what we've had to do. And persevere, man, I'd be like the best like description of it, but like to keep like keeping on, like to keep moving towards that goal, to be so focused, um, and not being like shaken off of that path, at least not so easily. So problem focused, I guess, and maybe not like solution focused, but problem focused, that we're consistently moving towards that goal. So like it's still very much a work in progress, and I think that's good, because we're still very, and all things considered, young company, and like very early and very malleable when it comes to our culture. And we're still looking for like the input, and we're still looking to develop it. And we, even collaborating with you on it to make sure that we're like hitting on the right points, because again, like we mentioned earlier, we've had like one type of perspective so far, and now we're introducing a new perspective. And that's going to be very helpful for us to have a much broader or inclusive culture, because we're able to kind of see and have a different set of experiences besides the, Aaron and my experience. Now we have your experience as well, and your vantage points. And so I think it's very, very valuable still, but overarching, we still want to be hyper focused, to be focused on like our problem and solving that. So beyond that, we're still really working it out.
I think kind of summarizing to an extent what Brandon said, and then adding based on what I think, I would say focus, efficiency, and intensity. Those are like three kind of pillars that I think about. And to throw out like a sports analogy, because I always do that, I want to work like athletes, but also rest like athletes. So I think there's a lot of startups where like you have to work hard in any startup. There's a lot of startups that kind of the culture is focused on just putting in a ton of volume of work. But I think you don't necessarily need to do that. If you're super focused, super efficient, and you just kind of like are doing the right things at the right times, then you don't need to run yourself into the ground. Like 40 hours a week is like, that's a lot. If you're focused for 40 hours a week, that is a lot of working time. I think a lot of people like they think 40 hours a week and it's like they're taking coffee breaks, or they're like checking social media, or they're switching from task to task. But if you're like very, very focused, and you put in, even if you put in like 30, 35 hours a week, like that, you can get a ton of work done. So I would say like, yeah, like we want to get a lot of work done in terms of volume, but also like we have other things that we want to do. We want to take care of our mental, emotional, and physical health. And, you guys have families, right? You have other people that want to see you. So I never really want to be part of a company that is making people sick, either mentally or physically.
I love that. Love that response. First impressions. I know you don't remember first impressions, but what was your first impression of me? And be nice.
My first impression, it's kind of funny because you're saying like you're like performance marketing, and that like performance marketing is kind of like really where your experience is. And for whatever reason, I was like thinking you were more of like a storyteller marketing person and that you didn't necessarily do performance marketing. So I think I just like either misheard, or it's just like the storytelling part like stood out to me so much that I just completely forgot about the performance marketing stuff as well. But I was like, yeah, this is someone who can help us tell our story. And like, that's something that we need. And also like, you seem like a jack of all trades. So that was also something that was good. That was like I said, like, I can't remember a ton in terms of first impressions, but I think those are like jack of all trades, and storytelling is her superpower. I think those would be the two things that stood out to me.
To your point, storytelling is just ingrained in me. So even in performance marketing, I did talk about that a lot in our early conversations, because that's just a part of my DNA. No matter what I'm doing, I'm incorporating storytelling. So it makes sense that you got that. Brandon, be nice.
Being nice. Let's see. No, I'm kidding. No, I thought it was like the first impression, like the fact that you took the interview, because I was like, oh, we'll throw it out that we have some times right before Christmas, like before the holidays, to actually like meet. But I don't know if anybody will ever would bite on that, because it's like a time where you're not necessarily anticipating or expecting people to carve out time for, for you to conduct an interview. And so the fact that you're like, oh no, I'm willing to jump on. Like, all right, that's cool. Like that shows the kind of like flexibility that would be awesome to have as a team member. And so I thought that was really good. And then to kind of echo what Aaron was saying, really like kind of hummed in on me on the storytelling aspect of it, like, oh, because that's something that we kind of mentioned that we were really like hoping to bring in, because we didn't have a very condensed, like well set out story. We had all these like points, but we wanted them to be connected. We wanted someone to like kind of connect the dots and to tell it in a very cohesive and still, persuasive type of a way. And so like, that's really like where we were like kind of focused on, and didn't even like think about the other aspects of it. And we're like, man, we need to touch base with her on whether or not she can do these other things. And it ends up that you being like a jack of all trades. So like the first impression was, from what I remember, even though like first impressions are so amorphous, like I think the first impression was cool. You did carving out time for us in the middle of holiday season. That's pretty sweet. And then too, just having like that storytelling, that writing background, I thought that was big, because writers obviously are a huge part of storytelling, and you being a writer was huge.
Thank you. I love that for me. And and hopefully I've lived up to the hype.
Yeah, no, you lived up to the hype. You lived up to the hype.
I would say you exceeded it. You exceeded the hype.
All right, one up me, but yes.
And then switching gears, I want to know, what does success look like for Worldie, and not just numbers wise. Of course, we want to sell through the roof, but also an impact, because I do feel like that's a big part of what you guys are about.
I would say for me, like this has been our goal, is just being the number one for kids sports brand in the world. So shoes, apparel, equipment, if we could be the number one kind of player for all those different things, that'd be amazing. I think also just creating innovation in the kids athletic shoe space, because we've heard a lot of times that there's not really innovation that's going on in that space. It's really like going on for adults, and then that same technology is passed on to kids, but something that's designed for adults to use, like kids can't really make use of it because they're not running as fast, they're not as heavy, they're not cutting as hard, they're not jumping as high. So creating innovation in the space, and then also making sure that kid shoes are not an afterthought, because we've heard that from a lot of different people, that a lot of these brands are not really focused on kids at all. It's just an afterthought. Either if we could just make such a big impact in the space that's all from us, or if we even just encourage other companies to focus more on kids as well, I think that would be, for me, that would be a win as well.
Yeah. I think a win for me is like a lasting company, so longevity, like being able to endure, and then being able to endure while making the type of impacts that Aaron just mentioned. Another thing that I would add to the impact is like we, from almost like day one, I think, wanted to be hyper localized with like our production, like moving product production from, overseas out of sight to right here, and to do it in like a very, you know, technologically advanced way, so that it's like a much more environmentally friendly way of producing things. So like we came up with these like sayings like, we don't want our, your shoes to travel hundreds of miles before you ever wear them. Like we wanted you to be able to like go and shop at the very same spot that the shoes are being made at. And so like I think that would be something that would be awesome, if we can kind of change the way that products like shoes are made and where they're made. And then again, to like Aaron's point, like the emphasis and the impact of the product for, kids, like really specifically making the product for them as opposed to a scaled down version of an adult shoe. So I think those are the things, amongst other things. We have like a whole entire like vision, like for the next like 10 years or whatever. And I even remember a day at booth, like whiteboarding it all out. I think we still have pictures of that. So it's just like, those are the things that I think would make for, in my opinion, a successful venture, something that's super impactful, the impacts that we mentioned, and then lasting. So like, it's not a fleeting impact. It's something that continues to carry on, even hopefully after us.
Love that. I have a couple of more questions before the rapid fire. One is, if we fast forward 5 years, since you kind of touched on that, you said 10, so cut that in half. Where is Worldie and where are you two?
I would say hopefully we have a few different SKUs in the footwear space. So maybe like 2 or 3 different SKUs, and we've iterated and improved, and there's kind of like tangible technologies or features that we can point to that we don't have in the current version of the shoe. I would say hopefully tens of thousands of customers, maybe even hundreds of thousands, regional or national retail presence. So people being able to like go to their local shoe store and buy our shoes versus only being able to buy online or in very specific locations. And then hopefully we're still running the company. So that would be the goal 5 years from now. So that's what I would say.
I don't think I have anything to add to that. I think that covers where I would hope we were at in 5 years. So yeah.
And do either of you have like a dream goal or a dream I made it moment, whether it's a partnership or it's like a viral moment, or anything else?
I think for me, it would be when people stop comparing us to Nike, because that means we've really made it. And I think other people, I don't know if you two had older siblings growing up, but like if you had an older sibling who was a good student, and then like you have the same teacher as your older sibling, they're always like, hey, are you so-and-so's brother or sister? And then you're always getting compared. And it's kind of annoying. And you're kind of like, I don't want to have the same teachers anymore. Like I just want different teachers so I can create my own legacy. Not legacy, like in elementary school or whatever, you're not creating a legacy, but I think you know what I mean. So that's kind of like the way that I think about it. Like I am tired of getting compared to another company, and I don't like Nike is not the measuring stick for me in terms of whether we're successful or not. I want to just be kind of a standalone company. So if people stop comparing us to Nike and they just like view us as our own brand that is killing it in a specific space, for me, that would be like, we've officially made it.
Yeah. I mean, I think I get what you're saying. I think people are always going to like compare you to your peers or compare you to like other companies, unless we're like having some sort of monopoly over the entire industry. Like they're going to like compare. But I think like in terms of like being the measuring stick, like we're the ones who you measure by. That would be like the I guess the highlight. That would be where we would want to like be at, is to be the one that you measure success by. Like, okay, if you're looking at kids products, kid shoes, are you as good as Worldie at doing it? Like, are you going to be able to make the same type of impact as Worldie is making in the kid space? So I think that it'd be like us replacing like a Nike. And now it sounds like kind of crazy to even say it, but like us replacing Nike when it comes to like kids products, kids athletic wear, kids athletic footwear as the measuring stick.
And so it is. Those are all of the questions. I do have rapid fire because I know you guys do rapid fire. So
Yeah, let's go for it.
Okay. So one word to describe working with each other.
I would say progress, because we've made a lot of progress together, and it just, like we were saying before, it just kind of works. And the yin and the yang allows us to progress and kind of push this thing forward on a consistent basis.
Resilient. I'll stick with resilient.
What keeps you up at night about worldie?
Margins.
Product market fit. Like, we're concerned about making sure that we're really getting product market fit, getting that right.
What's a weird or unexpected skill you've picked up since starting this company?
Being able to evaluate shoes, knowing the different components of a shoe, understanding manufacturing, manufacturing a little bit more. So
Posting on LinkedIn, and then also video editing to an extent.
And last one, what's the best advice you've ever gotten about business or life?
If it's not differentiated, then there's no reason for it to exist.
yeah, I think that's a good one. Differentiation.
I lied. It's not the last one. I'm throwing an extra one in there per our earlier conversation. So what's one thing that you both will do this week to take care of your mental health or emotional health?
Hang with family.
I guess go for a walk without my phone or any technology.
I love it. Well, that's it. That's all I had.
Also, we need to come up with like some kind of closing.
Yeah.
Like it just kind of like cuts off, but I think that
When I listen to it, I think what helps, I haven't picked up on that, and it's because it immediately goes into music.
the music, yeah,
Yeah.
does it.
Okay, we're done.
Cool. Well, I guess that's the episode.